Hello, everyone. How are you? You all here for acoustic treatment? Fantastic. Excellent. Just to warn you, for those of you in the back, we do have jam clinic. So if you'd like, you can scoot forward. Believe me, if you get up and leave, it won't matter. You won't hurt my feelings, okay? But you might not be able to hear back there because I've been in a couple panels today that were in this room and jam clinic got very jamming and it was interesting. So just be aware that if you cannot hear, I'll do my best to speak very loudly because that's what I do. But yeah, it's nice to see everybody. Thank you for being here. What's even cooler is right now, hopefully, my students in Texas, Texas A&M, University Kingsville should be watching this right now. You better be watching it. It's on the Twitch stream, so we'll see. They have an assignment. They got to watch it and write it up. No, they actually don't. I forgot to put it on Blackboard, so it's okay. So while we're waiting for people to come in, I just figure I would talk to you a little bit. I'll just tell you who I am so we don't have to waste time with me introducing myself. But my name's Dr. Jonathan Cresci, and I own a business called Fundamental Sounds. That is a audio production company. We do all sorts of stuff. It's also a record label. And I am also an assistant professor of sound recording technology at Texas A&M University Kingsville. So it's down in South Texas, down south of Corpus Christi. And we have a beautiful school of music, and we do some great sound recording down there. And so I just want to sort of give you the background of what we're going to be learning today. So we can't start yet because it's only we got 5 minutes. But we're going to learn about acoustic treatment, okay? Because acoustic treatment is very important. Any questions that you might have in the first beginning 5 minutes that I can just talk to you about? Yeah?
So is it just you on the stage here?
It is just me on the stage.
I'm from the media department, so
Okay.
we're recording it, so
Yeah.
that camera will be on you, and then we have that on a separate feed.
Fantastic. Excellent. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Is it possible to overtreat a small room?
The question is it possible to overtreat a small room? Absolutely. Because it kind of depends on what you're trying to do, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the panel, because when we talk about acoustic treatment, we need, like most of my panels. How many of you were at any of my other panels? Couple? Okay, so like that recording panel that I gave, like how to create a recording rig, you also have to make decisions about your acoustic treatment. Like, what are you trying to do? Because I've made the mistake, and I'll own up to it. So when I've done panels in the past and people are like, oh, is the foam good enough, right? I put foam all over my walls, and that's how I acoustically treated my room. And I would say, no, of course it's not good enough. That's terrible. Don't ever do that. Those don't work. Well, I have to backtrack on that because it depends on what you're trying to do. Right? It's terrible for music. Like if you're trying to produce music, nope, that's not good. However, if you're just doing voiceover work and you're trying to eliminate reflections and stuff, then it actually probably would be halfway okay. But like to your question about overtreating something, if you're doing it for music, you run the risk of overabsorption, which means now all of a sudden the room is completely dead. There's no sound to it whatsoever, and it will actually affect the way you mix. And so I'll discuss some ways that you can make it less absorbent, yet still produce what you're looking for. Yes?
So then you're basically saying that when recording, you don't want to have like a completely dry sound in the room?
More about when you were, so the question is, was I saying that that when you're recording, do you not want dry? It kind of depends on what you're recording. But it was more, when I'm talking more about the concept of mixing and doing things that involve that, because those are the aspects that you can make mistakes with when you are over how can I put it, over treating your room. Sorry, I just remembered that I have this really interesting picture that I just found that I'm just going to throw in the presentation. I literally found it while I was in another thing. But yes, so like depending on what you're doing, like if you're recording your voice, over treatment is not really a thing necessarily because you want it as dead as possible, right? Because you want other people to be able to do what they want to it, i.e. your production engineer or whatever. However, it is very unrealistic. So like people will get uncomfortable if all they hear is a voice without any kind of ambience around it, because it feels like it's in your head and it's weird. And like I'm really sensitive to those kind of things. So I'm always steering people into the realm of let's be more natural and less unnatural, because it bothers me when I listen to that kind of stuff. However, it does help when you have a treated room. But like for music, most of the time we were actually looking for rooms that have sound. So like if anybody's interested in classical recording, I'm giving a panel tomorrow about it. And in that sense, you want to avoid a dead room, because if you have a dead room, then it sounds really weird. All right, so it is 3:00, so we're going to start, even though we already started. So it's great. All right, so Fundamental Sounds, this is me. You can get a hold of me through my email address. That's a Twitter address there. I know people don't like Twitter anymore, so I signed up for whatever that other one is. It's a blue something. I'm fundsounds.bluesomething.whatever, so you'll be able to find me if you're there. Although, funny thing, I actually, somebody reported me because I was at MAGFest, and apparently it sounds a whole lot like... and people were like, what are you doing? I'm like, whoa, I didn't know. Like, read it, look it up, go on Wikipedia or something. Jeez. Okay, so there you go. My website is fundamentalsounds.com. It sucks right now. It's getting redone, but it still works. So you can listen to all my artists and such. And if you want to get in touch with me and ask me questions, which is 100% what drives these panels, when I get questions from you all, that's how I know what to talk about on panels. Otherwise, I'm making guesses, and that's always hard. Please email me. I've had some people email me already about stuff. I will always get back to you, and we can always start a conversation. Okay? So please, that is 100% you guys control content. So the first thing I'm going to say, public service announcement. Soundproofing is not acoustic treatment. I will say it again, soundproofing is not acoustic treatment. Sometimes you use acoustic treatment while soundproofing, but they are wholly different things. Okay? If soundproofing was what you were here for, I will talk a little bit about it, but you do need to know that there's a difference, because on YouTube, this is scary bad. Like when you go on YouTube, they're like, I put up these things to make my room silent, and that's not what happens at all, okay? So what's the difference? The difference between room treatment and soundproofing is room treatment corrects your room. Your room, this room, right? This room has a sound to it, right? I gave a panel a while back on reverb, and basically I couldn't show any examples because the room was so big that it had its own reverb that it imparted on everything that I played through the speakers. So it was basically like, trust me, this is how it works, but you can't tell, okay? Because rooms have sound. And so when you are listening to music in a room that is untreated, certain frequencies will get emphasized or de-emphasized, and we'll talk about that. And when you're doing music production, that's bad. Because then you'll be like, wow, this sounds great. And then you'll put it in your car and you're like, wow, this sounds awful. And then you'll put it in someone's living room and you're like, oh my God, this is even worse. And it's because you don't actually know what you're hearing, because your room is imparting a sound. Okay? So it is an instrument. The room is an instrument, just like anything else. Soundproofing, on the other hand, is isolating said room from everywhere else. So for instance, right now, Jam Clinic has stopped. Man, that's awesome, right? However, when it's going, you will hear Jam Clinic no matter how many doors are shut, right? Because these rooms are not soundproof. And the thing is, if you want to soundproof something, you have to isolate it from the rest of the building, which means different floors, different walls, different ceilings, isolating yourself from things like HVAC and all sorts of stuff. Like I remember my mom, like when I was little, she would get up at like 3 a.m. She was like a total morning person. And I remember being able to hear the news from the basement in my room upstairs because I could hear it through the HVAC. And so there are many ways sound can get in and out of your room, and in order to soundproof it, one must prevent all of that, okay? And so that's why it's different. Soundproofing is much more involved. It may go something as much as building another room inside of your room in order to isolate you from the rest of the world. One of the old schools that I used to work at Frederick Community College, they had a recording, they turned the cafeteria into the performing arts building. So like the live room for the recording studio was the old cafeteria. And the problem was that when they built the live room, they didn't slice the concrete slab. So if I put a punk drummer in the live room, you could hear it in the theater. Like you could hear it across the building because the sound vibrated through the concrete slab into all of the other rooms. So the only way they could have stopped that is to take a saw and cut the foundation so that it was completely isolated. So that's why, soundproofing is hard. Soundproofing is hard and it's expensive. So we're going to go to things that are relatively just as complicated, but much less invasive when it comes to things like this. But just know that if you're trying to soundproof something, your best bet is probably to get as like far away from other things as possible, okay? Because those are the things that make noise. Anything that moves air is going to move sound, okay? Now, when we talk about room treatment, it is all about the reflections in your room, okay? That is what causes things. What causes issues. And those reflections, they cause something called room modes, and those room modes cause room nodes. They should have named it something different because it's so close. I make that mistake all the time. I'll say nodes instead of modes and then modes instead of nodes. And really what this starts with is, how many of you know what phase is? Okay, someone tell me what phase is. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. And doing what?
It's too much of a Saturday.
Okay. So he's right. It's shifting wavelengths, but then what do you do with those wavelengths? You add them together. No subtraction, but you add. Phase does subtraction for you if you want it to do it, but basically you're always summing. In audio, we almost always, I don't actually know of how you would subtract something in audio necessarily, but it's all about summing things together. So when you take two waveforms, two sound waves, and you add them together, you will get different effects. And that's like, for instance, when something is out of phase, and I have a slide on this, so I should probably say that, how waves sum. But when they're out of phase, you could actually eliminate them completely if you want. So phase is what all of this is about. It's about reflections and how frequencies bounce back and forth. Now, there are a lot of different room modes, okay? But we're only going to talk about one because math is hard, all right? So let's start out, well, actually, I'll go one ahead. We'll go to the complicated ones first. So there are two types of room nodes. So, for instance, if we all look around here, this is a room. How many surfaces does this room have when it comes to 90-degree surfaces? It has a lot, but let's pretend we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Every room has 6 basic surfaces without putting any extra stuff in it, right? So a tangential mode is when a wave bounces off any of the 4 surfaces. So think of it as going like ping, 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 like it's going around the sides or going around this way, okay? 4 surfaces. Oblique walls, they go off all 6. So it's like a sound bounces here and then there and then off the floor and then off the back and off over here and then off over there, and it goes all the way around in one thing. Those are hard to calculate. So we're going to ignore those for now because that makes things a whole lot more complicated, okay? But we are going to look back at axial modes. Okay? Hey, look at that. I made a 3D thing in Keynote. That took me like 20 minutes. I'm so proud of it. So those are the axial modes. It's when things bounce off of two walls. See, it's much easier. Two walls. Okay? So it's like front, back, ceiling, floor, side to side. Okay? Those are your four three axial modes. Okay? That's how sound is going to reflect in your room. And those reflections will then cause room nodes or room antinodes. Now, this is complicated. Is there any questions so far about what I'm saying here? Sounds pretty straightforward, at least a little, right? Okay. So this is the demonstration of phase. You take two waveforms, two sine waves, and they are in phase. They will add together and they will get 3 decibels louder, whatever they are. So if you have a 440 hertz wave and it's in phase as it reflects off your walls, it will get louder and louder and louder as it reflects because it keeps adding to itself. If, however, that waveform, the 440 hertz waveform, reflects and ends up being out of phase with itself, it will cause what is called an antinode, which basically cancels it out. So what I'm demonstrating here, and what I'm showing you, is that your room will end up imparting its own sound on what you're doing, right? So like whatever you're doing, however you're exciting that room, the room itself will have its own frequency plot, for lack of a better way of saying it. So what room treatment does is it addresses all of the weird stuff in your frequency plot to try to make it as natural and even sounding as possible. Cool? So let's look at the ideal room size. Nobody has this. No one has this. Like base houses don't come with 24 feet long rooms. I mean, maybe they do, but in general, nothing like this exists in a house, right? They exist in commercial spaces. Now, the reason why there could be different lengths, but the main reason why this is an ideal room is because none of the dimensions are divisible by one another, which means when things are reflecting, right, you will get nodes. You can't get rid of nodes. You will always have nodes in a room, especially in a rectangle room. Always have them. They're always there. But you don't want multiple modes to produce the same node. Does that make sense? So like if you're in a cube, that means, let's say, you're in a 12 foot by 12 foot cube. That means that there will be a very distinct set of frequencies that every wall, because they're the same distance from one another, will emphasize. So you'll end up with 3 different points where you're adding more sound to that node, and so it makes it much worse. Whereas this, none of the walls have the same distance apart. So each axial mode has a different node, which makes them much quieter and much less intrusive. And this is why recording studios can be really expensive, because what they do is they get a big space and then they make their own spaces in it. And some of the ways you can get rid of nodes is if you make your space into something that's not a square. Like you end up turning the walls a little bit and like angling them in different ways, and that way you break up these modes. But of course that's expensive because making crooked walls is hard, right? So that's something. The unfortunate thing is this is the typical bedroom. And I know everybody here, at least most of you, probably are operating in a bedroom-sized room. At least a little bit, right? How many here are operating, maybe not a bedroom. Let's say it's an office, but it's something like that, right? Yeah. Okay. I do it too, right? I'm living in an apartment right now. I just moved from Little Rock, Arkansas to Corpus Christi. I'm living in an apartment, and bedroom 2 is my studio. So why is it like this? Do we know why our rooms are this size? Any? Right, and because we have certain standards in the United States, right? Like studs are supposed to be 16 inches on center. So when you build a room, when you build a house, these are the most typical sizes because they work like that, right? Like plywood. When you go to buy plywood, how long is it usually? 4 by 8, 8 feet, 4 feet by 8 feet. So it's hard to make something that's not 8 feet tall. Like it's hard to make a room that's like 9 feet because then you basically have to put up an 8-foot piece and then cut another foot piece and stick it on top, right? I mean, it's not hard, but it's more expensive. So you end up having 8-foot ceilings. You end up having 12-foot lengths or 10 feet widths. Okay, now let me quickly run over here. So hold on, I'm gonna stop the mirroring really quick. Come on. Absolutely.
It sounds like we're discussing specifically for recording, but would this also be applicable for someone doing like a theater room setup?
Absolutely. Yes. The question is does this count for things like theater rooms or anything that you're listening in? And it also, for any of you who are recording anything, it all counts. So yes, this is all the same. Hold on one second. New shoebox shape. Here we go. Okay, so here is a cool tool. Let's see what happens when I do this. Ta-da. Okay. This is called the AMROC Room Mode Calculator. This is free, although you can pay for it because you can support this person via Patreon if you would like. What you can do is let's put in that typical room size. So we've got 12 by 10 by 8. Calculation warning. I don't know what that meant. Oh, it's because it's in centimeters and not feet. That would be stupid. Okay. That's an awfully tiny room. I don't know how we're going to get in that. Okay. Why would you stay on centimeters? I don't know. Okay. Anyway, I digress. So look at this. This is showing us all of the different room modes, or the room nodes. So you've got one at 46. You've got one at 54. You have one at 70. These other ones are tangential. Don't worry. We're worried about the big, tall red ones. Okay, and this is 93, and you start seeing these. And if you look down here at the bottom, you'll notice how 46 has an axial mode, 56 has an axial mode, 70 has one. Now, this isn't as bad as a square, right, as a cube. Let's try a cube first. That would have probably been smarter. So let's go 12 by 12 by 12. Notice it has less modes. But notice that when I come down here, they're all of the axial modes are the same. All of the tangential modes are the same. So you're ending up with like a whole bunch of these modes that are making your room sound even more different. Okay? This is a really cool calculator because you can actually, like, they have a like a 3D thing where you can actually see where the nodes are when you're like don't sit here if there's a red blob or whatever. And of course, if you pay for it, you get other fancy stuff. But I didn't pay for it, so no fancy stuff for us. However, if we look at 24 by 15 by 9, right? Notice that when we look down here, the axial modes are all different. See how they're all different? So you still have them, but they're different, which makes them not as obtrusive. It makes them easier to handle, and that's why we have it. One of the reasons, by the way, is anybody wondering why I picked 24 inches long or 24 feet long? Is there any? Okay. That's because the length of your room determines the lowest note that you can hear in it. So notice how the lowest note that we can hear here is 23.6 hertz. Okay, if I put in let's say 12 by 10. Okay, now we're down. Now we're up to 47 hertz. So so basically your length of room determines what you can hear reliably in your room. Okay. Honestly, though, there's no reason to hear stuff below 40 hertz. I mean, seriously, even if you're doing music, I mean, okay, dubsteppers out there, I get it, right? Fine. But think of it. How many of us have rooms that are big enough to listen to the subwoofers? In fact, I had a question from somebody. Is Alex in the room? Alex is not in the room. Okay. So he asked me last night via my email why certain music from the 90s doesn't, when he boosts the bass, it doesn't appear that any bass gets boosted. And when I looked at it, it was because all of the bass, because it was like dubstep-esque music, it was all down in like 30 hertz. And so he was boosting it, and it was being boosted, but he couldn't hear it because he has nothing that will actually produce that sound unless you have a subwoofer doing it. So that's something to be aware of. That was an aside, but there you go. Okay? So this is an interesting way to visualize what your room will look like. Okay? So let's think about, well, what exactly do we want to do to this? Any questions so far? No? We're good? All right.
This might be a bit of a basic question, but why specifically does the room length limit the perceived
That's actually a very good question, and I debated about whether getting too technical or not. So here we go. Frequency is measured in hertz, which is cycles per second. Okay? Every waveform has a length and a frequency, and of course it has speed because it's sound. Okay? The speed of sound is 1130 feet per second everywhere most of the time, so that's the constant. So basically every frequency has a specific wavelength. And they're inversely proportional, which means if something is a high frequency, it has a very short wavelength. And when it is a low frequency, it has a very long wavelength. And so when you do the math, like I'll get my calculator out. Here we go. Calculator time. Let's see. What is it? Okay. So if we say 40 hertz, so 1130. Okay, so a 40 hertz waveform is 28 feet long. Okay, so well, it does fit because you can like half wavelength it and it'll work. Basically, you need to have basically half the wavelength to make it work in the room. But I mean that's how big it is. Have you ever wondered why like people who have like the big sound systems in their car that you can hear them coming from like miles away, and it's always just like boom boom boom, like all you hear is the low end, and as they get closer and closer you hear the more and more high end as you get. And that's because also low end has a lot of it has a lot of energy. Right? It has a lot more energy than high frequencies. And so that's the problem in small rooms. When you have room nodes that are in the low area, they tend to take the room over. And so what will happen is you will hear ringing in the room, like you might hear, like your ears feel full, even though you're not hearing anything. It's because of all the low frequency buildup in your room. And if you're doing music production, what that will do is that will make you not put as much bass in something. Because I won't need it. You're like, oh, I can pull that down. It's too loud. And then you put it somewhere else and like, where's all the bass? It's gone. And it's because the room was emphasizing the thing. Right? So yes.
And then so to link that to the modes, that can affect where certain places in the room affect volume of rate.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. So the answer is where those modes are affect where the volume is of those particular frequencies. Yes. And so we always treat, if you're doing a room, you're always treating for the place that you're going to sit. Okay, which and also, so we want to treat where we are sitting because every part of the room is going to be different. Okay, so now we go to acoustic treatment types. Now we get to figure out how do we fix all of this. All right, there are two types of acoustic treatment. There are absorbers and there are diffusers, and that is it. Okay, sometimes there are absorbers that also diffuse, and sometimes there are diffusers that absorb. But if we break it down, there are absorbers and diffusers. So let's do a quick thing. What do you think your foam is? It's an absorber, right? So foam is an absorber. Okay, how about piano blankets or moving blankets? Absorbers. How about couches? Absorbers, very good. How about plywood? Right, depending on how it's made, yes, diffuser or some kind of reflector, something that separates things. So notice how all of the things that I'm mentioning are the things in your room that you probably have, like a couch, right? Or nice puffy chairs for people to sit in, or for you to sit in for that matter. And all of that's doing is absorbing frequencies. The thing is, though, is that, as I said, low frequencies are harder to absorb because they have more power. So what is easy to absorb? High frequencies, right? So high frequencies are easier to absorb. So that's why when you start putting foam everywhere, you end up with a room that lacks high frequencies, that feels like you've got pillows around your head. Or if you're doing voiceover work and you're like in a closet filled with foam and you're talking and you're like, how come everything sounds like this? And I don't know why it's just so big and boomy, right? It's because the room that you're in is absorbing all of your high frequencies because you've done that with all of your absorbers. So we have absorbers and diffusers. This is what an absorber does. So you get a signal, it goes into the absorber, okay? And then it reflects because absorbers are not infinite. We don't there is one type of infinite room. Have you ever heard of an anechoic chamber? Right? Anechoic chambers absorb everything, right? So when you go in there, it's perfectly, not only are they decoupled from the rest of the building, but they absorb every frequency. So when you talk, you just disappear. Like you have no references, there's no walls, no nothing. In fact, you usually are standing on some kind of mesh floor that is acoustically transparent, so you're not even getting like height information in your head. And so a lot of people have a hard time sitting in them because you'll get sick, you won't be able to know where you are. It's real weird. So that's what absorbers do. They accept a particular frequency and then it doesn't come back, right? Now, different types of materials absorb different frequencies. So bass traps, right? They are a type of absorber that will collect low frequencies. They're made with rock wool or Owings Corning's 703, which is an insulation. Okay, these are the stuff that you read on the internet. The plans on how to make your own bass traps, they do work. Like you can do that. Like if you have the carpentry skills and the tools and you don't mind handling fiberglass and breathing fiberglass in and doing all of the things that you will do when making this, then go right ahead and you can build them. But just know that in order for a bass trap to work on a low frequency, we're talking like 5 to 6 inches. So you will have a 4-inch piece of rock wool, and then that needs to be in a bass trap that is almost 6 inches wide, or 6 inches deep. Yes.
How effective are corner traps that have like a 2-lane width going to the long side of it that goes on the floor and the ceiling?
Okay, so the question is, how effective are corner bass traps? Right, yeah, they're made from rock wool, and basically they're triangles that go up. Corner bass traps are always the most efficient bass traps because they absorb twice as much because they're on 2 walls, basically. They're at the intersection of 2 walls. That's usually where the most buildup happens. So if I go back to that program, you'll see like highlights in the corners. That's usually where a lot of your low frequency lives. So they're very good at that. It depends. The more, the better. So the question is 2 feet enough? Enough treatment is up to your budget and your room size. The reason why I emphasize how thick bass traps are is because if you're working in a small room and then you fill it with bass traps, you're going to be working in a small closet, right? Like it's just going to start creeping in on you. And that's why people put things in the corners, because it's usually less usable space, right? Because no one puts things in corners. And so that way you can get a lot of bass trapping, but at the same time, preserve as much room as possible. Okay? Things like foam, your couch, all of those things, those tend to, they absorb high frequencies. And what they're good for is they're good for getting rid of things like echo, right? So let's say you're doing voiceover work, right? Or you're doing a podcast or you're doing a YouTube video and you hear your room in your recording, right? And everybody's annoyed at you because you hear it, you're hearing the person in the room and it doesn't seem like they're close enough and it doesn't sound like a radio, right? In that instance, you want to use things that absorb high frequencies because you're trying to get rid of the sound that you're in a room, the reflections that you're in a room. So things like this room here, we have carpet, we have drapes that are very thick, right? All of these things are here to help absorb some of the high frequencies so that when I talk to you, I'm intelligible, right? So in my school, in my office, they have little high frequency traps over our walls so that when you're in the office and you're talking to people, you're not like they can hear you and they can understand you, because that way they're not hearing all these weird reflections off the walls and all this other stuff. They don't soundproof the rooms at all, and they're not good for like a listening space, like if I were to listen to music in there, but they are good for speech. So that's something to think about. Yes?
Where does mass-loaded vinyl fall into this?
Mass-loaded vinyl. The question is where does mass-loaded vinyl fall into all of this? Again, it's an absorber, and it also does some reflection. And I'll be honest, I am not a acoustician to the point of being able to design bass traps. But what people do is they will use that vinyl, that mass-loaded vinyl, as a second layer. So like they'll cover the bass trap with it so that it actually can absorb more low frequencies and then reflect higher frequencies. So they're trying to, because every time you put a bass trap in a room, not only are you lowering your low frequencies, but you're also lowering your high frequencies at the same time. So you have to be very careful because again, you put a whole lot of absorption in your room, the room is going to start sounding worse and worse for just everyday life. But high frequency absorption does work when you're making something for voice work, podcasting, things like that, because you're only worried about vocal frequencies, right? My voice is relatively high. I don't have a low voice, but most voices don't go below 100 hertz. Like unless you're Barry White or someone of the such, you're not going to be singing that low, right? You're not going to be talking that low. You will not have that low of a voice. Most of the time, most of your intelligibleness in voice comes in the like 300 to 600 hertz range, and then the consonants and the clicks and pops of my mouth are up in the 10 kilohertz range. So those are the things that can excite a room that is very reflective. And so you can put those barriers up, those high frequency absorbers, to get rid of some of those reflections. And it'll make the room sound more dead, right? Which is what you might want. The next thing is a diffuser. Okay? Diffusers this happens to be an example of a quadratic diffuser. Okay? And what it is they are pieces of reflective material that are set up in a very specific way to reflect in a very specific way. The reason I say that is because the rumor that you can just put like a bookshelf up and put random books on there at different spots and that's a diffuser, it isn't, okay? So don't do that. Like you have to buy these, or you have to buy but you can get, go online and you can look up quadratic diffuser calculator and it'll be like an Excel spreadsheet and you tell them like what frequencies you want to diffuse, and it'll design the quadratic diffuser, and then you have to cut the boards to very specific lengths and glue them together and then mount them on the wall and do all of that stuff, right? So, but what diffusers do is they don't absorb. They actually reflect, But what they do is when a signal, so this is one wavelength, pretend this is like 500 hertz. It hits the wall and it scatters. So instead of reflecting back and forth between the walls and adding itself up or subtracting against itself, now what you're doing is you're going, pow, and now it's going all over the place. And by breaking up the signal like that, it makes it have less energy. And so by the time it gets to your ear, it doesn't have those modes anymore. This is a funny picture. This is called a skyline diffuser. I always show this to all my students because I don't know why they did this. And this is going out on the internet and I'll get hate mail. But that. So those are skyline diffusers. And the picture, if you can like look all the way up, they're like going all the way up the ceiling. And then on the ceiling, they're all like there too. So it looks like all these stalactites and stalagmites. I don't know what studio this, I'm sure it's a famous studio that's this probably actually works. But to me, I always find it like, it would be cool to work there because you're like in this cave. But at the same time, I think it's a little bit overdone. But you'll also see absorption there too. You'll see like the places where there aren't diffusers, those are absorbers. But what a skyline absorber does, diffuser does, just like the quadratic diffuser, is what's happening is by the way, diffusers work mostly on high frequencies, right? Like because they have the lowest energy. So what happens is it goes out, it hits all of those different spots, and it scatters it everywhere. And of course, when you're surrounded by it, it's scattering it all over the place. And because it's all being scattered, it loses all of its energy. And instead of you feeling like you're in a very closed space, now it feels like you're in an abnormally large space. So when you go to the atrium, how many of you have gotten up early enough to go to the atrium when there isn't a crush of people there? Okay. You've been awake that long. Okay. People who have not gone to bed yet and ended up there when there isn't a crush of people. If you talk to somebody in that atrium, or you talking to yourself maybe, right? I do it. Have you ever noticed that you don't hear any reflections? Like unless you yell, like unless you do Colossus Roar or something. You just talk normally, right? It kind of sounds like you're isolated, even though you're in this highly reflective space, because when you put the orchestra in there, right? It's like noise, right? It's like orchestra. And so the thing is that when you have very large spaces, it can actually make you feel more isolated because the high frequencies that cause that reflection to give you sort of like, this is the floor, these are the walls. They have so little energy that when they go out, they don't ever come back. So they'll go out and they won't come back. It's like when you go to a church or a cathedral and you listen to music, or even that orchestra, right? You listen to the Gamer Orchestra. I bet how many of you listen to the orchestra? Cool, all right? Would you consider it, where did you listen to it from? The Belvedere area, all right? So is that the up part? Yeah. Like the balcony area, the bar and there stuff. Would you say from listening to the orchestra from up there that the orchestra was bright or dark? Do I need to define bright and dark? I'll do it. All right. This was actually somebody asked this question last year, and I was like, I've never had to answer that. So bright and dark. Something is dark when there's a large amount of low frequencies. Something is bright when there's a large amount of high frequencies. So bright would be flutes and bells and things that are tinkly and stuff like that, whereas the low frequencies are going to be like that, those rumble and that kind of stuff. Definitely dark, right? I was there. I listened to it. It was super dark. It's not their fault. They're not dark, although they may have liked it that way. It's cool, right? But it's because when they played, if you were far away from them, some of those high frequencies never made it to you, right? It was just out. It's why when you go to concert halls, they'll have these reflectors in the ceilings. You'll have these big, they're called clouds. There's these giant wooden things that sit on the ceilings, and they point out. That's so that when stuff comes up, it can be ejected out at the audience so you can hear. Yes, sir.
I was in the orchestra
sat in the back row,
Mm-hmm.
and I could barely hear the flutes at all.
Right. So this person was in the orchestra, sat in the back row, and could barely hear the people in the front, the flutes, etc. Right? And that's because of the frequencies. Right? It's just the way things work. So diffusers do that to a small space. So when you have a smaller space, okay? Here's the thing. Oops, let's go back. Diffusers only work if you are far enough away from them that the reflections can disperse enough. So if you go to a studio and they have a big skyline diffuser on the back and there's a couch and you sit on that couch, that diffuser will not work for you because you're too close. Yes?
Why don't they just make like recording studios in like really big rooms then? Like, why are they like the last picture that you showed that's like about the size of like half of this room? That's like it clearly like it's better to have a lot of air in between, right?
All right. So the question is why don't they just make recording studios in bigger rooms? The reason is because it's too expensive. It's because you would have to buy a warehouse and you'd have to build it, and it's a very inefficient use of space. So unless you want to, charge $1,000 an hour, because you also have to heat and cool that space also. So that's why things are smaller. And for us, we exist in smaller spaces, right? Because we're not going to go buy another house to have a recording studio, right? We're going to try to do it in our basements or do it in our bedrooms and stuff like that. So, yes, sir.
So when I was sitting like in the orchestra performing, I can hear the sound bouncing everywhere, but the people listening in the audience can't hear like the sound bouncing, like the echoes of it.
Mm.
Why is that happening when I hear it but we don't hear it?
Okay, so the question is he was sitting in the orchestra, and he could, and the reflections were audible, but the audience, the reflections weren't audible, and it probably had to do with where you were sitting. What instrument do you play? Oboe. So you're the oboe. So you're somewhere in the middle, right? Right. So they're in the middle, and they are sort of, you're surrounded by floor, and you're surrounded by the rest of the orchestra, and so you're hearing the immediate reflections from your area, where everyone else who was way up, and I'm sure the people who were like right next to you, because I know there was like a gaggle of people with like phones like this, right? And they were listening to, they probably heard the reflections too, but the people who were way up in Belvedere, by the time the high frequencies got there, it was already gone. And that and that again is one of the ways that you can record stuff, is you can put your microphones where the frequency is where you want it. So diffusers only work when you are far enough away from them. And we're talking like 4 to 6 feet. That's sort of your critical distance. If you are closer to a diffuser than that, odds are the diffuser is just going to reflect that energy right back at you. So don't use diffusers in your room, because they are expensive to buy, unless you have enough space between you and the diffuser. Okay? Yes?
How much space is enough space?
How much space is enough space is the question. So we go back to things that, I mean, you're talking about like the smaller your space is, the harder it is to treat, because you have big modes or big room nodes, pardon me, and in order to treat those, you're making your space even smaller. So what you want to do is you want to calculate, like think about what you want to do, right? I don't know what you want to do, but like if you want to record a string quartet, you need somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 square feet of usable space. So that means you've got 500 square feet, however those dimensions are, and then you've got to say, well, 20% of that room is going to be treatment. So you got to make it 20% bigger than that in order to handle the treatment of it. And that's kind of how you decide. It's all based on what you're going to do. Now, when we get to the end of this, I can tell you how you can work in a very, very small room. So we'll do that. All right. So the next thing that you want to look at, okay, is why and what are you doing? If you're doing content creation, bass trapping is not as important, because no one is hearing that, right? Because the content creation, well, let me say, if you're doing vocal content creation, i.e. you're speaking, you're talking, you're videoing, that kind of stuff, if spoken word is what you're doing, you don't need things that are like a ton of bass trapping, because you're not exciting the room. Your voice doesn't have the frequencies to do it, so it's not happening. So in that sense, you can use things like foam, or I would personally go, and I can show you a website that I have used in the past, where you can go and you can actually purchase stuff because someone else made it and they know that it works and they tested it. That's the other thing, is you always want to buy stuff that has testing involved, because there's a lot of stuff out there where someone just threw a piece of foam in a wood thing and covered it in cloth and said, hey, here you go, right? And you don't actually know what it's doing, right? So for content creation, high frequency stuff is your friend, because we're trying to get rid of the reflections. The other thing that you can do is be in a bigger space, right? Because if you're in a bigger space, then you're going to get less of that. The unfortunate is the bigger the space you're in, most likely you're going to have other traffic in your room, and that's where soundproofing comes in. So that's why people do it in bedrooms and the such. If you're doing music production, it's bass trapping 100%. Forget about the high frequency stuff. You might need some diffusion, but don't worry about high frequency absorption, because the bass traps will do it for you. And you're going to want a lot of them. And they work really well. Like I have in my studio, or in my bedroom that I'm using as a studio, I have I have 7 bass traps. And they're on the walls and in the corners and right behind me. And I really wish it was I moved in before I knew I was going to do this panel. And I really wish I had taken pictures and audio of what it sounded like before and after. And it doesn't sound great, but it sounds a whole lot better just having those things up. And what's great is that bass trapping can be portable. So like I moved those bass traps from my house. Like they went on the moving truck and went, and I can hang them on the wall with picture hooks. And that way you're not doing anything permanent to anything. You can move them, and I think that's important. So bass trapping and diffusion is for music production. High frequency absorption is for content creation. Yes?
Does the level of bass trapping you want for like only recording vocals different if you have multiple instruments?
So the question is the level of bass trapping different if you're only recording vocals as opposed to with every instrument? And the answer to that is yes. You might not even need bass trapping if you're recording vocals, because again, you're not exciting the room in the frequencies that would require bass trapping.
Singing and spoken word is similar.
Yeah, singing and spoken word are very similar. That's why, like Amy Winehouse, right? That her hit record, that was recorded in a closet. They recorded her vocals in a closet. It was in the basement of some person in New York with the guy who produced her, and they recorded her vocals in a closet. Now, you have to be careful, because if you record vocals in a closet, it'll sound like your vocals are probably in a closet, right? So you might have to do some MacGyvering to make it sound better. So you want something larger than a closet. But again, the only thing that would have been there is high frequency absorption, whether they left the clothes in it or whether they just lined it in foam. Those kind of things, it's only mid to high frequency absorption. There was another question. Yes.
So if I buy like a 2-foot by 2-foot diffuser and put it against the smallest of the bedroom walls, so like the 10-foot by 8-foot, that's
Okay.
4 square feet on 80 square feet. Is that going to do anything? Like how much percentage do you need covered?
So the question is, if they put a 2-foot by 2-foot diffuser on the smallest wall of a bedroom, how much diffusion do you need for it to be effective? And yes, that is probably not going to be effective. I can't give you an exact answer. However, I can. I'm about to show you the tool that we can use to get that answer, right? So the hows. Here, everybody came for this. We left it for the very last part. You're going to use what is called Room EQ Wizard. REW. It's free. It works on everything. I'm pretty sure it's free. Mine was free. I didn't pay for it. It might be like, hey, it's free for some stuff, but you might not get everything. So what this does is you have wherever you're going to sit. You will have to buy a microphone, right? They're cheap. You want a measurement microphone. You just buy the one off Amazon, like a Behringer one for like $50, or I think there's another one. They're Electret, meaning they put a battery in them. They're used for measurements. They won't sound great if you use it to record something, but for measurements, it's perfect, okay? And so what you do is you put that up in the spot where you're going to listen. And then you use a computer to run this program, which will send out a frequency sweep. So you'll hear it go boop, like that. Much higher because I can't sing that high, and much lower because I can't sing that lower. But it'll do this big sweep, and it'll capture what your room did. This is called a waterfall plot. And you will actually be able to see what your room looks like as far as frequency over time. So what a waterfall plot shows us, if we look here, all the way down. So on the bottom, I don't have, on the bottom, which you can barely see, are frequencies. So all the way to the left is 30 hertz, all the way to the right is 10 kilohertz. Notice how at 10 kilohertz, we have very little spike, right? And it doesn't last very long because this is 3D. So as you get closer to you, that's time moving forward. That might not make sense. So in the back, so where it says 0, look all the way to the left at the top, you'll see 0. That's the moment it starts. And as it moves forward, you start to see seconds or milliseconds. So basically it's your frequency over time. And you'll notice that some of these very large peaks die out. Other ones last a little longer, right? And those are that's to show you what nodes are happening. The things that poke out are where your frequencies are that you're trying to get rid of. Yes?
So I know I've seen those used a few times as microphones. How precise does their positioning have to be? Does it have to be like your head level, or does it matter if it's just like that bodies there?
So the question is how precise does the positioning need to be? I would go so far as to say it should be as precise as you can get it. Does it matter what it's on top of? You should have it. Say it again.
Like if I put boxes under it.
If you put boxes under it, probably it'll be okay if it's in a shock mount. If it isn't in a shock mount, okay. So are you saying that you're not putting it in a microphone stand? You're just going to lay it on a box?
Let's say I want to set it in my office for recording, and I want to raise it to my head height. What should I put it on top of so that it gets to my head height?
You should put it on a microphone stand on a mic holder. So the question is, how should he get it to his head height? It needs to be on a microphone stand in a shock mount or in the mount that it came with, and just put it up where it's going to be. But you want to put it where your ears are, okay? We're not talking about speaker placement. This is a picture of some guy on the internet, I don't know. And he was doing this for his home theater setup. And so you notice the microphone is right by where he sits, which is in the middle on that couch. That's his spot. That's where his head is, and that's where he's going to measure his room. And what happens is you run that sine sweep, and you get your picture. And then you can start looking at it and going, okay, I have a big dip in this particular area. I have a big spike in this area. I need to buy things that address those. Okay? The other thing that you can do, if I flip over, is you can go to a place like GIK Acoustics. GIK Acoustics is a really nice place because, let's see if I can change what I'm watching. Window or app. How about this? Ta-da. Okay, what's nice about GIK Acoustics is they offer free advice, and their advice is very good. And what you can do is you can send them like a Google, does Google make a 3D thing? SketchUp? Yeah, do like a SketchUp of your room, or just give them dimensions. And if you have that sine sweep from the Room EQ Wizard, they can look at that and go, okay, this is what I would recommend, and these are the price ranges, and then you can do it piecemeal, right? You can be like, okay, we're going to start with this, and then when I get more funds, I'll get this, and when we do this, I'll get this, and you tell them what it's for. Yes.
I was just going to say, the GIK, I believe they still have a room kind of builder that you can send them for a plan.
Yes, so the comment is that GIK Acoustics does have a room builder, and you are absolutely correct. I just had a really hard time using it, so I just went ahead and did the other thing. But I'm also a customer that I've been using their stuff for a really long time. I'm trying to find the test results. Here we go. This is what's nice about... Hello? There we go. This is what's nice about what they make. They actually show you what that acoustic absorber actually absorbs. Notice how it absorbs from 400 hertz up. It does not absorb much below 400 hertz. Okay, this is super great. Yes, in the back.
Quick clarifying question. When you were talking about the sine sweep, is that coming from the microphone or monitoring speakers or?
Good question. So, clarifying question, when I was talking about the sine sweep, where does it come from? So you will hook your computer up to the speakers in your room. So you'll have to have a speaker in your room to do this. You hook it up. You don't have to have two speakers. You can just have one speaker. It doesn't matter. And you send the program, Room EQ Wizard, provides you with the sine sweep. So it makes the sine sweep for you and does it. By the way, either wear earplugs or leave the room when you do this, because it will get loud and it might hurt your ears. So just be careful with that. And the microphone just picks up what it receives from the speaker, and it basically creates a frequency plot of your room. Okay? This is also how, by the way, a lot of the new speaker systems out, like Genelec has a GLM system, Neumann has one. Everybody's got like these room EQ stuff, right? That helps fix rooms that are bad. They do work, mostly. You have to sit in a very specific spot and you can't move a whole lot. But it's not a replacement for treatment, right? You really should do as much treatment as you can so it doesn't have to work as hard. All right, so if we go back here, I don't know how to how do I do this? Okay. Cool. So, hello, why are you not working now? There we are. So, questions about what I've talked about. This is also those are actually not what I'm doing. So, I apologize. Yes? So, when I'm talking about foam, I'm talking about the acoustical foam that you can buy. Again, I would err on the side of going to a place like GIK Acoustics or other acoustics manufacturers, because the stuff you get off Amazon, you're not guaranteed that you're actually getting acoustical foam. You could just be getting foam that they've had somewhere. You don't know where it's coming from. You want to get it from a reputable dealer. Any other questions? So I'm going to run real quick while I find this, and I go to...
Making your presentation available after the panel?
Well, number one, it will be available, mainly because they're recording this panel, so you'll be able to just do it again, and I can also make it available online. So just real quick, I will answer your questions. Obviously, don't go to the things that happened on Saturday or the one that you're at, but those two at the other end are what I'm doing. So let's start here.
Does temperature and humidity affect sound?
Absolutely. The question is, does temperature and humidity affect sound? Absolutely. Most of the time, it affects its speed, which then will actually affect its wavelength because of its relationship. But I would assume you'd have to be in some serious changes. Like you'd have to be in some place where you have extreme heat or extreme cold. I wouldn't worry about it too much, especially if you're in a spot where you're air conditioning or you're conditioning the air in some way. Back.
So, at my work, we have a fairly substantial auditorium and not a whole lot of control over it because we are simply contracted with the city who owns the building. But we do have
Okay, so the question is you don't have that you work at an auditorium and you have very nice equipment, but you don't have a lot of control over the room. How important would it be for a frequency plot? So the thing is if you don't have a lot of control over the room, then it's going to be hard to do any kind of treatment because they're not going to let you do that. However, you can do a frequency plot of the room, and that will help live sound because you're going to be so live sound people, they do what's called ringing the room, which is they send a signal, basically a sine sweep, and they find out where all of the room modes are because those are the frequencies that are going to cause feedback. And then they will go in and they will actually cut out those frequencies in their mix. They'll just eliminate it. Now, it won't get rid of feedback, but it will get rid of it'll allow you to play even louder before you get feedback. So I think it's very much worth it, and I think it's what people should do regular.
The sort of, I guess the intent for asking that is, we tend to ring out the room by a very long process of having somebody just speak into the microphone.
Oh.
And I would like to work a way of having a good baseline for getting the room rung out like by myself when we have downtime.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not a live sound engineer. However, if you email me, I will talk to my live sound engineer that I work with and see what he says. But I would assume that if you go and you do ring the room out, like with a sine sweep, that would give you a very good baseline. And that way you wouldn't have to go through the long process because you would have the information already.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions? Yes.
Are there any good, you said you recommended that one software earlier. Is there anything else that makes it useful for, say, I work IT in a warehouse, we have to do building-wide meetings just with whatever's there.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously those rooms are barren and extremely terrible for that. What would you recommend to help out with that kind of thing?
So the question is, you're in IT.
We're trying to eliminate feedback from our own employees speaking through my.
Okay, so they're trying to eliminate feedback from doing meetings. And in that sense, what you'd want to do is you want to, this program might help, but the other thing would be is to go through each area and just make sure that the microphones are pointed in the direction that they need to be pointed in, or if it's a desktop microphone, that it's in the correct space, because a lot of that can cause feedback if it's in different spots. And if they're holding it, well, then you've got to teach them, like if I take this microphone and I point it this way, I'm going to cause feedback because it's going to pick up this. What you might want is to get microphones that are more directional. So like this microphone is very directional. So when I move out of its way, you don't hear me. And that can be very helpful for that. So something that is a hypercardioid is very, very directional, and that way it'll be easier to work with. But unless you can treat your rooms and work on their technique that they're using holding it, it's just you're just gonna have to wing it. Yes.
I have a section of ventilation that runs through my media room, and it cuts the room entirely in half.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I watch a movie, maybe a little bit louder, I will hear vibrations coming from that. Would I be looking for a diffuser or an absorber?
Okay, this is a really good question. This question is, right now we're basically over. But this is a great question. I have two comments. Number one, he has an HVAC, and the HVAC is making noise. This is a soundproofing thing. It's not absorbers or diffusers you need. You need to put a baffle in your HVAC. A baffle is a muffler. It's literally a muffler. And what you're going to do is you're going to put it close to the source where the vent is going, and it intercepts the HVAC and your vents. And what will happen is the vibrations will bounce around in the muffler, and they'll become a lot less obtrusive, and that way you will hear less. It will also, however, lower your airflow. So if you need like super cold, you're going to have to like lower the temperature more because the airflow won't be as good. But that will help isolate the vibration from those things. So it'll be a muffler.
So the muffler goes in with the actual ventilation?
So like the HVAC system has a vent that comes out that's feeding the vent that's cutting your room in half, right?
Right.
You would put it before the room. So you'd connect it here, and then it would connect to what was connecting your room.
Okay, that's fine.
So just, Yeah, you'd have to find out where it is, but it's just like a car. You put the muffler at the place to prevent because everybody's heard, right? A car without a muffler, and it's like obnoxiously loud. That's what we're trying to do. Last thing before I let everybody go, and you can ask me more questions if you like. I don't want to keep the room, is if you can't do this, if you don't have the space, use headphones. Like if you're mixing and you don't have the way to do all of this, use headphones. Okay? That way you don't have to worry about the room. If you're doing content creation, you can't use headphones because you're recording your voice and it won't matter. And that way I would go with just high frequency absorption and put enough in so that you don't have the reflections that are annoying you. And then use other tricks like gating and things like that to get rid of the rest of the room noise. But high frequency for content creation. For music, you need a lot of stuff with bass trapping. If you can't get it, use headphones. Okay? Thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody. Thank you. By the way, this is where you can get a hold of me if you're interested in Reaper or classical. That's tomorrow in the orchestra rooms, which are over there. There. Okay. And you can always get me at my email address.